The email came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night and I almost didn't open it. I was still in my scrubs, half a bowl of leftover pasta getting cold on the coffee table, my feet propped up on the couch the way my grandmother always told me was bad for my posture. I was a third-year resident in emergency medicine at Emory. I was tired in a way that doesn't have a name. The kind of tired that lives in your jaw and behind your eyes and somewhere deeper than sleep can reach. The subject line said, Notice of Delinquency. AC count Enid 7742. I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it. Then I saw my full legal name in the preview text. Sloane Elizabeth Hargrove, not a nickname, not an abbreviation. My full name, the one that appears on my driver's license and my medical school diploma and exactly nowhere else I would have given to a mailing list. I sat up. The pasta tipped. I didn't notice. The email was from a private lending firm in Nashville called Bridgepoint Capital Group. The account in question was a personal loan. The balance was $214,000. The status was 90 days past due, and the primary borrower listed was my older brother Garrett. The cosigner was me. I read it 3 times. I turned my phone off and turned it back on like that would change the words. It didn't. $214,000. Co-signed by Sloane Hargrove. My social security number, the last 4 digits of which were printed right there in the email, confirmed it. I had never co-signed anything in my life. Have you ever had a moment where the floor just disappears? Where you're standing in what you thought was your life and then suddenly nothing under you is solid? Leave me a comment if you know what I mean. Because that's the only way I can describe sitting on that couch at midnight in my dirty scrubs holding a phone that told me I owed $214,000 for a loan I had never agreed to take. My hands were steady. That's the thing people don't understand about working in an emergency room. You train the panic out of your hands. It goes somewhere else, somewhere quieter and colder. But your hands stay still. My hands were still. My chest was not. Garrett is 4 years older than me. He's charming the way a river is charming. Beautiful to look at. Easy to get swept up in, and not particularly concerned with where it takes you. Growing up, he was the one who got the benefit of the doubt. He was the one our mother Vivian described to her friends at church as finding his footing. He was the one our father, before he passed, had quietly bailed out twice that I knew of and probably more that I didn't. I was the one who got a full academic scholarship and worked night shifts at a hotel front desk all 4 years of undergrad anyway, because I didn't want to ask. I was the one who took out my own student loans for medical school and made every payment on time because my credit score was something I had built like a piece of furniture. Slowly, carefully, with my own hands. And now someone had used my name to borrow $214,000. I didn't call Garrett that night. I knew better. Garrett under pressure is Garrett at his most persuasive, and I couldn't afford to be persuaded. I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. I called my friend Petra instead. Petra is not a lawyer. She's an accountant, which is somehow more useful in a situation like this, because accountants know exactly how money moves and exactly how to follow it. I'd known her since college. She picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy, and I said, I need you to be awake. I'm sorry. I need you to be awake right now. She was awake. I read her the email. I heard her sit up on the other end. She asked me 2 questions. When did you last check your credit report? And do you have any joint accounts with your brother? The answer to both was no. I pulled my credit report up while she was still on the phone. The Bridgepoint loan was there. It had been there for 8 months, opened in my name, listed as co-borrower. Perfect payment history for the first 5 months, and then nothing. 3 months of nothing, and now this email. 8 months. Someone had been using my credit for 8 months, and I hadn't known. Sloane, Petra said. Her voice had that particular flatness that I'd learned meant she was being very careful. This is fraud. I know, I said. No, she said. I mean, this is federal. This isn't a family argument. Someone used your social security number and your identity to secure a loan. That's a crime. I know, I said again. There was a pause. Do you want me to come over? Yes, I said. Please. Petra arrived with her laptop and a yellow legal pad and a box of those mint tea bags she knows I hate. But she likes, and we sat at my kitchen table until almost 3 in the morning mapping out everything. The loan had been originated at a Bridgepoint branch office in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Murfreesboro was 40 minutes from Nashville. Nashville was where Garrett lived. The application had been submitted online, but it had been notarized in person. Someone had gone somewhere with a piece of identification and signed my name in front of a notary. Either they had a fake ID with my information, or they had found a notary willing to look the other way. Either possibility was nauseating. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times my family had called me rigid, inflexible, too focused on the rules. Vivienne used to say I had no grace, that I couldn't bend, that everything had to be exactly right with me or I'd make everyone miserable. She said it like a criticism. Like the fact that I'd put myself through school and built a career I was proud of was somehow a character flaw. Like being responsible was a form of cruelty I was inflicting on the people around me. I thought about that a lot in the dark that night. The way competence becomes a resource. The way people who build things somehow end up surrounded by people who feel entitled to dismantle them. By 6 in the morning, I had made a decision. I called a consumer protection attorney named Elliot before my shift. I'd found him through a referral network for medical professionals, the kind of lawyer who deals specifically with financial fraud, identity theft, and what he called on his website, situations where family and finance become catastrophically entangled. That description had felt written for me. His assistant answered. I explained the situation in 60 seconds, and she said he'd call me back within the hour. He did. Elliot was direct in a way I appreciated immediately. He didn't express sympathy. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He asked me what I wanted to accomplish. I told him I want my name off this loan. I want to understand the full extent of what was done, and I want to know who else knew. He told me to pull every account, every credit inquiry, every soft pull on my report going back 2 years. He told me to freeze all 3 bureaus immediately. He told me not to contact Garrett until we spoke again. That last part was harder than it sounds. Garrett called me that evening. I watched the phone ring. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it ring. The third time, he sent a text. Hey, have you gotten any weird mail lately? Don't freak out. Call me. Don't freak out. I put the phone face down and went back to Elliot's email. 2 days later, Elliot called with the full picture, and the full picture was worse than I had imagined. The Bridgepoint loan was not the only one. There were 2 others, a personal line of credit for $45,000 through a fintech lender and a cosigner agreement on a business loan for $78,000 tied to an LLC registered in Tennessee. The LLC was called Hargrove Property Solutions. I had never heard of it. The registered agent was listed as Garrett Michael Hargrove. The cosigner on the business loan was listed as Sloan E. Hargrove. $337,000. That was the total. $337,000 of debt that existed in my name without my knowledge or consent. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and I did not move for 11 minutes. I counted them on the clock. 11 minutes, where I just sat there with my hands in my lap and breathed. And then I went inside and I worked a 12-hour shift and I did not think about it once, because that is also what they train you to do. You compartmentalize. You put the thing in a box and you close the lid and you deal with the box later. Later, I would deal with the box later. When Elliot called again the following morning, I was ready. He told me the business loan was the key. The LLC had been registered 14 months ago. The documentation used to establish the cosigner relationship on that loan included a copy of my driver's license, not a fake one. My actual license, the one I had lost 18 months ago and reported as lost to the DMV. I hadn't thought about that lost license in over a year. Someone in my family had that license. Someone had found it, or taken it, or held on to it, and waited. Elliot didn't say it out loud at first. He let me arrive at it myself. I said it. It wasn't just Garrett. No, he said. He didn't think so either. The notarized signatures were done in person. There was a cosigner acknowledgement form for the business loan that required a witness. The witness signature on the form, he paused here, listed a Vivian Hargrove. My mother. My mother had witnessed the signature, my forged signature. She had sat beside someone signing my name on a loan document, and she had signed her own name to confirm it was me. I want to tell you that I cried. I want to tell you that there was some enormous wave of grief that hit me and made me collapse or scream or do something that made sense as a human response. But the truth is, I didn't cry. I just felt the last warm thing in my chest go very, very quiet. Like a pilot light going out. Not dramatic. Just out. I'd thought about Thanksgiving the year before. Vivian had called me 3 days before, which was unusual. She normally let things go to the last minute. She'd asked me to bring my insurance cards because Garrett had a situation with a doctor's bill and she thought maybe I could help figure it out. I brought them. I'd sat at her kitchen table going through paperwork with her for 2 hours while Garrett paced the backyard on his phone. I'd thought I was helping with a billing dispute. I had handed them my information. I had sat there and handed it over and called it helping. Elliot said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Everything. I want to do everything." He filed the fraud affidavits with all 3 credit bureaus the same day. He contacted Bridgepoint Capital Group directly and initiated a forgery dispute. He sent preservation notices to the fintech lender and the business loan servicer. He filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. And he told me that given the use of my lost license and the notarized forgery, there was a strong basis for a criminal referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I told him to make the referral. Then I called my mother. I hadn't planned to. I had planned to let Elliot handle all of it and simply disappear from their lives cleanly, the way you'd close a window. But I was sitting in my apartment that night, and I thought about that Thanksgiving table. I thought about Garrett on his phone in the backyard while I helped my mother go through paperwork. I thought about the way she'd refilled my coffee without asking, the small domestic gesture that felt like warmth. And I needed her to know that I knew it wasn't. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was careful in a way that told me she'd been waiting for this call. "Mom," I said. "Sloan," she said. She started right in. "I know you've gotten something in the mail, and I need you to understand that Garrett was in a very difficult position. He had been trying to—" "Mom," I said again, louder this time. She stopped. "I know about all 3 loans," I said. "I know about the LLC, I know about the notary, and I know you signed as a witness on the business loan cosigner form." Silence. "I know you had my license. I know you kept it when I lost it. I know you were there." The silence stretched. And then, finally, she said, "We were going to pay it back. We never wanted you to have to deal with it. It was always going to be paid back before you ever found out." "You signed a document saying I agreed to something I didn't agree to," I said. "You sat next to someone forging my signature, and you signed your name underneath it." She started crying. Vivian cries the way some people draw a weapon. Immediately, effectively, and with precision. I had spent my whole life rearranging myself to stop those tears. I let them fall this time. I didn't hang up on her. I let her cry and then I said very clearly, "My attorney has filed fraud affidavits. The loans are in dispute. My name will be cleared." What happens to the two of you after that is not something I have any control over. She stopped crying then, just like that, like she'd found the off switch. You're going to destroy this family, she said. Her voice was different now. Flat, the tears already gone. I'm a co-signer on $337,000 of debt I didn't authorize, I said. What exactly am I destroying? I ended the call. I did not slam the phone down. I just pressed the red button and set it on the counter and went to wash the dinner dishes. My hands were steady. They always are. Garrett showed up at my apartment building 4 days later. I saw him on the call screen at the front entrance. He talked his way past the door by saying he was dropping something off for a resident, which was exactly the kind of smooth, low-stakes manipulation he'd been running since he was 16. I buzzed him up. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I needed to see his face. He looked rough. He'd always been the good-looking one in the family, the one who filled out a room. He looked smaller now. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was calculating, a kind of rapid processing behind the friendliness, like a cash register behind a smile. He sat down on my couch and he started talking before I could say anything. He talked for several minutes about stress and about a real estate deal that had gone wrong and about how he'd only needed a bridge loan and he'd known I'd say no if he asked and he hadn't wanted to burden me and he'd always planned to pay it all back before the first statement ever hit and he was so sorry, Sloan. He really was. He'd made a terrible mistake and he needed my help to fix it. He used the word help 4 times in the first 2 minutes. I let him finish. I waited until the room was quiet. Then I said, I'm not going to help you fix this. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. Nobody in my family had ever expected that from me. Garrett, I said, you used my identity. You opened 3 accounts in my name. You forged my signature. And our mother sat next to whoever held the pen and co-signed the lie. I'm not your bank, and I'm not your bailout, and I am not going to do what I always do, which is make the problem go away so everyone can keep pretending the family is fine. He tried one more angle. He said he could pay me back, that he had a buyer interested in one of the properties, that he just needed 30 days, that this didn't have to become a legal thing, that I was making this bigger than it needed to be. I looked at him sitting on my couch. My brother. My actual blood. I tried to find something in his face that was sorry, and I found only calculation dressed up in the language of regret. I said my attorney will be in touch. And I opened my door. He left. He didn't slam anything on his way out. He walked out quietly, which was somehow worse, because it meant he was already thinking about his next move. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. They were paperwork and phone calls and credit freeze confirmations and certified mail and Elliot calling to update me on each dispute and each filing. The fintech lender resolved first. The forgery was clear. My name was removed from the line of credit within 3 weeks. Bridgepoint took longer. The business loan took the longest, partly because the LLC documentation was more complex and partly because Garrett had hired his own attorney, which meant everything slowed down while they mounted a defense I found both predictable and exhausting. During that time, I got one call I hadn't expected. It came from a number I didn't recognize, a 615 area code. Nashville. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. The voice on the other end was older. A man. He said, "Is this Sloan? Sloan Hargrove?" I said yes. He said, "My name is Gerald. I'm Vivian's uncle. I don't think we've ever spoken, but I've been watching the situation with your brother for some time, and I think there's something you should know. I want to be clear. I had no idea Gerald existed. My mother rarely spoke about her extended family. There had been some falling out before I was born, something vague and unresolved that Vivienne had always described as Gerald being difficult and unreliable and best left in the past. I had filed him under family mythology and never thought about him again. He was not in the past. He was on my phone and he sounded entirely lucid and not remotely difficult. He asked if we could meet. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop in Buckhead 2 weeks later. He was in his early 70s, trim and sharp-eyed, the kind of person who listens before they speak and means what they say when they do. He ordered a black coffee and he didn't make small talk. He just looked at me for a moment and said, "You look like your father's sister," which I took as a compliment because I'd seen photos. He told me things that rearranged the walls of the house I'd grown up in. He and Vivienne's mother, my grandmother, Loretta, had co-owned a property management company for over 2 decades. It had been modest but stable. When Loretta passed 11 years ago, the business should have transferred according to her will, which had designated equal shares between Vivienne, Gerald, and a third partner. Vivienne had contested the will. The legal battle had taken 3 years. She had ultimately lost, but in the process, she had drained the estate of legal fees, fractured every family relationship within reach, and walked away with the settlement she then used to fund the life she now performed for her church friends. Gerald had not spoken to her in 8 years. But, he said, he had stayed aware. He had a financial interest in what happened to the Hargrove name because his business had once shared it, and he had been watching Garrett's LLC with the particular attention of someone who had seen that pattern before. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printout of the Hargrove Property Solutions LLC registration, the same one Elliot had sent me. But underneath it was something I hadn't seen. A second LLC, registered 6 months earlier under a slightly different name. Hargrove Property Management Solutions. Different LLC, same registered agent, same address. A business Garrett had registered before the one Elliot knew about and then apparently abandoned when the financing fell apart. Elliot hadn't found this one because it had been dissolved before the fraud began and the name wasn't an exact match. But Gerald had, because he'd been looking longer. There was more. The property Garrett had claimed he was trying to finance, the one he said had a buyer interested, Gerald had run the address. The property had been listed, contracted, fallen out of contract, and quietly relisted twice in the past year. There was no imminent buyer. Garrett's promise of 30 days had been a fantasy or a lie, and I couldn't tell which was worse. I sat with the folder and I looked at this man I never met and I asked him why he was helping me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because your grandmother would have." Loretta believed in people who built things for themselves. She didn't have much patience for people who dismantled other people's work instead of doing their own. He paused. "She told me once, before she died, that she worried about you. That she could see you paying for things you hadn't bought. She wanted me to watch." I had to look away, out the window at the parking lot. I needed a moment. I passed Gerald's information to Elliot that afternoon. The second LLC became part of the filing. It extended the pattern of behavior in a way that strengthened the fraud case considerably. Elliot said in his careful lawyer voice that the picture this painted was not of someone who had made a desperate one-time mistake, but of someone who had developed a system. The resolution came in pieces, the way things like this always do. Bridgepoint removed my name from the primary loan after the forensic signature comparison confirmed the forgery. The AG's office opened a formal investigation into both Garrett and the notary involved. Elliot filed a civil suit for damages against Garrett personally, for the cost of my legal fees, for the credit damage, and for what he called tortious interference with my professional standing, because the delinquency had shown up in a background check run by a hospital system I had been in preliminary contract negotiations with, and those negotiations had paused. They unpaused after Elliot sent the hospital's legal team documentation of the fraud. The contract came through 6 weeks later. I signed it on a Tuesday morning in my apartment with a cup of coffee and nobody there to celebrate with me, which felt both lonely and entirely right. Vivienne did not call me during any of this. Not once. I don't know what I would have done if she had. I'd like to think I would have been composed and clear, the way I'd been at the end of that phone call. I'm less sure of that than I sound. Gerald called to check in twice. Each time, he asked how I was doing, and each time I said I was fine, which was partially true. I was fine the way a building is fine after construction, functional, upright, somewhat different from what it was before. The evening the final credit bureau confirmation came through, all three accounts removed, my report clean, my score restored. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, and I opened the folder I'd been keeping. Every letter, every filing, every certified mail receipt, every email chain with Elliot. I read through all of it in order, the way you'd read a story someone else had lived. And then I closed the folder and I put it at the back of a filing cabinet drawer and I closed the drawer. I didn't delete anything. I'm a doctor. We don't destroy records. But I closed the drawer. I've spent a long time understanding what I was to my family. Not a daughter in the way that word is supposed to mean something. A resource, a fallback, a number in a column that could be borrowed against when everything else ran dry. They looked at the life I'd built, and they didn't see something to be proud of. They saw something to be liquidated. And for years I let them. I told myself it was love, and it was loyalty, and it was what you do for family. I sent money when they asked. I answered the calls. I showed up. And when I stopped, when I finally stood in my own apartment and said no, they found another way in. They took it instead of asking. But here's what I've learned about the thing they took from. It didn't break. I am still here. My license is intact. My career is intact. My credit score is, at this point, probably better than it's ever been. And I have a filing cabinet with documentation of every lie, every fraud, and every piece of evidence that I survived it. Not because I'm special or exceptional, but because I was the one who built things to last. Gerald and I have had dinner twice since the coffee shop. He tells me about my grandmother Loretta in a way that nobody else ever has, not as a saint, not as a symbol, but as a person who had ordinary flaws and an extraordinary stubborn belief that the work you put in should come back to you. She sounds like someone I would have liked. I think about what she said to him, that she worried about me, that she could see me paying for things I hadn't bought. I think about how a woman I barely knew, who died before I finished medical school, saw something in me clearly enough to ask someone to watch. You spend so long believing that the people closest to you see you best. You let them define what you are to them. The responsible one, the capable one, the one who can handle it, and you think that's love. You think being seen as strong means being loved. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means being useful. The people who actually see you are sometimes the ones who've been standing at a careful distance, watching you carry what you were never supposed to carry, waiting for the moment you finally put it down. If you've ever had to put something down that you've carried for too long, I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments. And if this one reached you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs it. Some weights aren't anchors. They're just other people's debt. And you are not a bank. I used to think the hardest part was discovering what Garrett had done. I was wrong. The hardest part was sitting with the fact that none of it would have been possible without years of me being exactly the kind of person they could count on to quietly absorb damage. There's a version of this story where I blame myself. I've spent time in that version. I handed my mother my insurance cards at Thanksgiving. I answered the calls. I sent the money. I told myself that was love and I believed it, which is the part that still costs me something when I think about it too long, not the $337,000. The belief. But here's what I've come to understand. Slowly and without any particular grace, what happened to me was not the result of my generosity. It was the result of their choices. Garrett made a decision. My mother made a decision. They looked at the life I had built through years of discipline and sacrifice, and they decided it was available to them. That's not on me. That's on them. And the consequences. The fraud filings, the investigation, the civil suit, the collapsed LLC, the reputation Vivienne had spent decades constructing. Those were the natural result of the choices they made. Not punishment from the outside, just the weight of what they did, finally landing where it belonged. What I keep coming back to is Gerald, a man I'd never met, who had been watching from a distance for years, who called because he thought it was right. He didn't owe me anything. He had no legal obligation, no financial incentive, no family closeness to draw on. He called because he had integrity, the real kind, not the performed kind my mother wore to church. He showed up with a folder of documentation because he believed that people who build things honestly deserve to keep them. That kind of person is rarer than we talk about. And finding one, unexpectedly, when you're in the middle of the worst administrative nightmare of your adult life, I don't take that lightly. What I learned from Petra matters too. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She showed up with a legal pad and started working. That's what genuine care looks like in a crisis, not reassurance, action. Intelligence applied to a real problem, without drama, without needing the situation to be smaller than it was. And then there's what I had to do myself, the part nobody could do for me. I had to call my mother and say the words out loud. I had to open the door for Garrett and then close it behind him. I had to sit with the grief of understanding that the people who were supposed to be my foundation had been quietly borrowing against it for years. That takes something from you. It also gives something back, eventually. A clarity that comes only from having looked directly at the truth and not flinched. I am still a resident. I am still building. My credit report is clean. The contract I almost lost came through. And I have a filing cabinet with documentation of everything. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm a doctor. And doctors keep records. If you've spent years being the capable one, the responsible one, the one who holds things together while everyone else leans, hear this: your strength is not a resource for other people to extract. Building something real, quietly, without asking for recognition, is not a character flaw. It's the hardest thing there is, and it belongs to you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.